Hey YouTube folks, welcome to another video, and in today's video, after many requests, I'm bringing you another opening for our series Learning the Openings. And which opening is it going to be today? That's right, the Stonewall. If you don't know the Stonewall, also known as the Stonewall, it's an opening that's an opening you can play both as white and as black, meaning you can build a repertoire with the Stonewall to play with both colors. And you'll see that the plans in the Stonewall are very simple to understand and usually lead to very interesting positions in the opening and even in the middle game. So let's learn how this extraordinary Tanton opening works now. So guys, here we are, and we're going to see how to play this Stonewall. Well, the Stonewall, for those who play as white, starts here with the move d4, okay, Queen's Pawn. And we're going to look at some of the main continuations for black, which will be with d5, d5, and knight to f6. It's okay? The three main continuations that your opponent can use against your d4, the first thing we're going to look at is the variation with d5 leading to the model position, the key position of the Stonewall, so that we can understand where the pieces go, what the formations are, and what plans we can use in the middle game. So, the Stonewall, after your opponent plays with d5, we're going to play here with e3. Don't worry about the bishop getting locked inside the pawn chain. It's part of the opening, and we'll explore how it works. After a common continuation like knight f6, we'll play bishop d3, an important move controlling the key f5 square, so that black can't put the bishop on f5. We'll also control the e4 square, so here you can continue with e6. And now, knight d2, an important move, okay? For those who play Stonewall, it's to defend the e4 square here. So bishop d6 is a common continuation, and now f4. This is a key move for those who are going to play the Stonewall, okay? Which brings exactly this formation here and absolute control of the e5 square. It's very important that we always have control of the e5 square with the Stonewall. And why is the opening called the Stonewall, right? Precisely because in the next moves, white will play here with c3. And we'll have this pawn structure here that really looks like a Stonewall, which prevents our opponent from breaking our position. And even though we have many pawns on dark squares and end up leaving our dark squared bishop a bit more restricted, the main theme of the Stonewall is that the light squares will be the attacking points for white in the middle game. So f4 is a very important move. We can't forget to control the e5 square. A continuation, for example, like castling, knight f3, knight c6, knight c6. Now we're going to play c3 here, creating our Stonewall. The e5 square remains very well controlled. Bishop d7 castling, rook e8, then knight e5 is a possible continuation. We have reached the model position of our Stonewall, where we managed to place our knight on the main square, which is e5, always keeping good control over the e4 square. The middle game plan that white can use in this position is to move the rook to f3, then rook to h3, and notice that we will have a very strong attack here along the h-file at the h7 point. Later, the queen can also come over to support this attack. There are also ideas of playing g4 and g5 since the knight on f6 is a defender of the h7 point, and everything starts to make a lot of sense for those who play this type of position, right? Which is, in reality, the Stonewall is an attack, okay? The idea for white is to attack with this opening, creating a stronghold with control of the center. Some precautions now that we already know the key position, right? Some precautions we need to take with the Stonewall are not allowing our opponent to break through with e5. This is very important, okay? After playing knight d2 and our opponent responding with bishop d6, this move introduces two key ideas. What are those ideas? Prepare to castle, short castle, and at the same time, there's an idea here of advancing to e5, right? Be careful. That's why we should play fi4 here in this position, preventing our opponent from playing e5. If at this moment we make a move, for example, like c3 and allow e5, then the Stonewall is over because our opponent will be able to break through the center. Or even play with e4 and control our diagonal here, which is the theme of our middle game. So we can't allow that. Whenever our opponent prepares to play e5, we should play f4. For any move by our opponent, for example, if the opponent here, instead of playing bishop d6, plays knight d7, What did this move prepare? E5, so F4. In the Limbilho, we can never allow E5 playing here with knight 6. Did it prepare E5? 4, same way, always, for any move. If you play queen D6, it prepared E5, F4. So it's very important that we understand the importance of controlling the E5 square. Other ideas require our attention. We can't allow our opponent to control the E4 square. That's very important, okay? So the bishop on D3 here is the move that controls a5 but also controls the E4 square, okay? So if our opponent keeps playing here with a queen to E6, we should immediately control the E4 square here. If we make a few moves, for example, play F4 here, our opponent can now play the knight to E4, and after a move like knight to D2, questioning the knight on E4, then F5, and now it's black, who is building a Stonewall here. So we can't allow that. We always have to try as quickly as possible to control the E4 square. This is very important. So 2 main details. White has to control E4 and E5. These are 2 important central squares. So other formations that can happen in these lines are playing here with E6 knight to D2 controlling E4, bishop to D6, and now F4 controlling, and after castling a knight to F3 black, here can play the move C5, which is a very interesting breakthrough move for black as well. How are we going to play in this case? We're going to play with our C3, creating our stone wall here. At this point, we must focus on certain move sequences, such as capturing on the D4 square. In a perfect world, white would like to capture with the E-pawn. But that's not possible because the F4 pawn is hanging here. In these cases, we'll capture with the C-pawn and keep our stone wall here. Our center is super controlled. However, nevertheless, and on the other hand, if your opponent allows you, you'll always want to make this capture with the E-pawn. An example, a practical example, right? For instance, if our opponent had played bishop to E7 at this moment. So we play our F4 here. And after a move like castle, knight F3 E5, we will play our C3 here in the same way. But notice that there's a difference now. Because if our opponent takes the pawn on D4, we can now capture with the E-pawn, since there's no longer a bishop on D6 putting pressure on the F4 square. So, at this point, we're going to leave the E-file semi-open, and after a sequence, for example, like knight to F6, castle, we'll play knight to E5. In the same way, that is, bishop to D7 and knight to E5. We've reached this position, but now the E3 pawn is missing. How does that help? We'll have more mobility for our dark-squared bishop, and the plans will still be the same. Rook to F3, rook to H3. The bishop puts pressure on the H7 square, and the queen can join the game at some point. So there are some practical precautions you need to take in the Stonewall. This idea is also very useful for the first moves, to understand how we play when our opponent plays with C5. Right away. When our opponent plays this move, we'll play C3 and go into the Stonewall the same way. It's just a transposition. Because there in the middle game, when our opponent plays C5, we immediately play our C3, and this also applies to the opening phase of the game. So that already justifies the first moves. Another possible continuation for black against our Stonewall is to play with the knight to F6. In fact, the King's Indian is one of the toughest lines for those who play with, who use the Stonewall, right? Because it brings some breakthrough ideas with E5 that work really well at some point, and we'll see how that works. So after knight C6, we're going to play the same setup, E3 G6. And now we're going to play our bishop to D3 controlling the E4 square, bishop G7, and now F4. At this point, we don't need to worry about playing knight D2 quickly to control the E4 square because the bishop already does that job very well. The black knight can't invade, so we play F4 right away. Then castle, knight F3 D6, which is a thematic move in the King's Indian, castle here for white. And after a move like knight C6 C3, and this is one of the themes we need to pay attention to when playing the Stonewall against the King's Indian. White will want at some point to try to expand these pawns, push the E-pawn to E5 if possible, but an interesting continuation for black here is to play E5 directly, already challenging the control of the E5 square. So in this case, we need to be careful because we can't get total control of the E5 square with the Stonewall against the King's Indian. But a very good plan to fight against the King's Indian with white in this case is to play e4 here, following the same idea of trying to play e5 at some point. Now e5 is pretty tight, for example, if you take with e takes d4 and c takes d4 in the future. White will be able to play e5 here and start to get very good central control. White's pieces also develop very easily, knight c3. The bishop can come out through e3 or d2. There can be ideas with queen e1, queen g3, and it's a comfortable position to play as white, okay? It's a very comfortable position. Of course, it changes a bit from the main pattern of the Stonewall against d5, right? But it ends up transposing into a very interesting opening anyway. So it's important for us to know how to play in these situations too, right? Of course, all of this comes from practice. We're going to practice, and you'll understand the ideas and put this opening repertoire into practice. Let's also see how to play the Stonewall as black. Very important and very interesting. So the Stonewall is black. For us to build this mini repertoire, it consists of the following sequence. The Stonewall will work very well against white's d4. If our opponent plays e4, then we have a little problem here. We can't use the Stonewall in this case. You'll have to use one of the openings you play against e4, like the French defense, which I really like. You can play the Caro-Can, the Sicilian, and that's your repertoire, which is being built. But against d4, yes, we can use the Stonewall, and how do we do that? Well, we play here with d5, and against c4, the Queen's Gambit from white, we play here with e6, a possible continuation, knight f3. c6, preparing our Stonewall here, and after the move knight c3, oops, prepared e4, just like we had that theme with white. When the opponent prepares e5, we protect. In the case of black, it's the same theme, prepared e4. And so f5, creating our Stonewall here. Very interesting. So a continuation if our opponent doesn't play so actively. It plays a bit more passively, just so we can reach the model position to understand. For example, if our opponent plays here with e3, then we will control the e4 square. The e5 square, bishop d3 knight, f6. Castle, b6 is a possible continuation. Knight d7, controlling the e5 square even more. Bishop b7 and now knight e5. Notice that in a mirrored way, we've reached the same Stonewall theme as the position with white. After knight e4, the main theme is that we have the knight on the advanced post, super protected as always. And the idea is to play with rook f6, rook h6, and now put pressure on h2. So the bishop is super active and the queen can also join the attack at any moment. This is the golden position for those who play the Stonewall with black, which brings the same idea as the Stonewall with white, which is very interesting. There are some things we need to be careful about. When our opponent tries to create some themes, for example, in this type of position with the knight on e4 wanting to eventually try to put a queen on the h5 line and play more aggressively, we just continue with our normal development. Knight f6 defends these ideas very well, and right after that, bishop d6 castle and knight d7. Of course, in this case, black is playing a tempo down, but the theme is still the same. So these are some of the main ideas you can use in the Stonewall, both as white and as black, okay? And it leads to this attacking line, and also always pay attention to controlling, in the case of black, the e4 and e5 squares. And as white, we also have to pay attention to the e5 and e4 squares. I'm going to prepare a sample game for you here, okay? I'm going to play a game against an intermediate level player, around 1,700 or 1,800 using the Stonewall, and we'll see how it works with players in that rating range, and if these plans we're looking at really work in practice. So let's get to this game now. All right, we got a 1,835, and we're going to play our d4 here. He played with d5, which is great for us to put our Stonewall, the Stonewall defense, to the test. He played nc6, so I'm defending the c5 square. He played more passively. Well, now he wants to invade e4, so I'm going to defend, right? Knight d2, as we've already seen. And let's see how he keeps playing here in this position. Yes, e6 is a possible move for black here. He played with b6. I'll play bishop e4 in this position. I'm already controlling. I want to bring out my knight here through the f3 square. And let's see how he's going to keep playing then. We know the plans. He considered moving the bishop to a6. All right, against these ideas of attacking our bishop here, we can play in a very practical way, okay? I can even allow him to take, or I can play queen to e2 and put the knight on e5 just the same. Both lines are interesting. I'm going to play queen to e2 here, because if he takes, I take with the queen. The queen will now play the bishop's role in the middle game. Knight to f3. I want to control the e5 square here, right? He played with the knight to d7. And now I can castle. Or I can set up the Stonewall formation, right? With c3, I'm going to castle here in this position, which makes a lot of sense to me. And let's see how he's going to keep playing. He might move the bishop, right? It's a logical move for him, playing heir to, followed by the knight to e5. We're in the Stonewall formations. c3 now, creating this superstructure. He castled. What's the plan here? Well, the plan here is pretty clear, right? Rook to f3, we've already seen that. And now I want to start attacking at the h7 point. Everything makes a lot of sense to me so far. He played with 5, so rook to h3 making the Stonewall plan, right? Now the queen is playing the role of the bishop here, that's the main theme. The knight is on e5 and I can use the ideas of g4 and g5. Open here for Lilizinha because Lilizinha wants to go out and he keeps thinking. He has 1,835, and here I think he already has problems in this position, right? Because the threat of g4 and g5 seems very interesting now for white, right? Well, he keeps thinking it's not that simple, really, because since I controlled the g4 square well, which is one of the themes of the Stonewall, right? I control the e5 and e4 squares, and black ends up with a very limited position, and these ideas here are very comfortable to play, to defend the themes on h7. He took here, and as we saw, whenever I can capture with the e-pawn, I should play this line, so I capture with the e-pawn. Because I gain more space for my bishop here in the future as well. If he captures here, he's taking a fork. If he captures with the bishop, I recapture with the pawn and gain more space. In this position, I'll play g4, a move that makes sense for me and is one of the Stonewall's themes. He played g6 defending. All right, now I have to analyze here how to proceed in this position because now the attack and middle game ideas are already underway. But now I have to understand how to proceed, right? Besides this position. If I play this idea, he can play knight to h5. There are even some sacrifice themes here that could be interesting, but I think it's a logical move for me here. To bring out my pieces, I have to be careful not to lose the pawn on g4. Another idea I could have is this one. Bringing the queen to h4 also seems to make sense, knight to f3. I have to worry about the line where he takes, and I take with the pawn, and this is hanging here. The pawn on g4, although I still think it's dangerous for him to take it, even if he takes this pawn. It opens up the position a lot more, right? But this idea also seems uncomfortable for him, right? Very, very uncomfortable. Interesting position here, right? h5 could be a... g5 could be an idea too. Then I have to see what I do against knight 5. I really want to sacrifice there, but here I think a move like queen g3 seems pretty logical to me. I'll go with the simplest plan, which is to play with queen 4 at some point. I'll keep improving my pieces now. I can play king h1, bring the rook to g1. And my game is open, right? He has 3 minutes on the clock. It's a game with more time. You can calculate a bit more. What is ueno? And this control of the e5 square here is very uncomfortable for black's position. I think a good plan for me here is to play with king to h1 and maybe later bring the rook to g1. Well, he took here. This seems good for me because I can take, right? And after that, the e4 square is a square that's controlled, right? The theme of the problem comes up. Now they're on his pawn, right, on h7 because I can take it. And the attack along the h-file starts to work really well now. Here I have queen to h4, right? Queen to h4, and he has problems there. So in a practical way, we're seeing how these little plans of the Stonewall work, right? The attack along the h-file. Even the dark squares here are really weakened. The bishop is coming in, causing a lot of activity. However, he faces a practical issue with the pawn on h7, which seems difficult to defend. He'll have to play that move, but Tommy will likely exploit the position and go for it with her. The Stonewall, hey. Okay, he played like that. And now I have to look for the checkmate line because it already smells like mate here, right? I'm thinking about bishop to h6. And if king takes, pawn takes, and the king is really trapped here, bishop to h6 should be a good move. Bishop to h6. We're already in the tactical stage. I have a lot of power on the h-file. If the king takes, my pawn takes the pawn with check. He had to retreat. I could even capture there if I want. Or I can simply take here as well. Seems like a good move. Where are the finishes with tomatoes? I'll just take here. I always consider checkmate themes with the queen on the 8th rank. The black piece's position is very dangerous. The Stonewall is an attack, yes, it always has been. All right, he played Urta. And now let's see what the most precise move is. Queen to g5 looks like a good move to me here because he has no way to defend this point at all, right? Because this king on f7. Check. He's going to end up getting checkmated there, right? I think this is a good move for me here. Going on the attack already? Pawn to g6. If he plays that, I have the bishop. A nasty move. A rook check and the king is very exposed in this position, right? Stonewall and its attacks. Well, he played a desperate line here, right? I can take it anyway. He's going to try to keep fighting in this position. He's going to try to keep fighting. I'm going to take here. He has check, right? I'll take here first. If he wants to play queen f7, I have bishop takes. It's a very difficult position. Though he's still fighting, you can see that these little Stonewall plans are effective. He has some little checks here from Spernegg, but I go king h1. And now it's a matter of practice. Let's take here. I can even play a really cowardly move here, qf6. He's trying to get into this square, but I play this and I'll have a rook advantage. If he takes, I take. He takes and I go after the pawn on e4. A rook up, I'm even threatening checkmates with tomatoes with rook to h8. He keeps thinking. Kamil Gerbi, 1,835, a nice intermediate level player. And we can also put the ideas to the test. We see that when we're playing, the ideas don't all happen exactly like in theory. But here there's already mate. Mates with tomatoes. So it's a very interesting opening. The Stonewall plans are easy to understand and work very well. Control of the e4 square. Here my opponent played bishop to a6, proposing the exchange, and we saw that we always need a piece on this diagonal and control of the e4 square. So even if he makes small changes in move order, we saw that the plans happen the same way. I set up the Stonewall formation here, rook to f3, then rook to h3, and the attack there on h7 with the idea of g4 and g5. And all of this works very well. There's the Stonewall in practice for you folks. So guys, if you like this video learning about the Stonewall, don't forget to leave a like and see you in the next videos, folks. Thanks.